Grease monkey. That's all you'll ever be. The words landed harder than the cold Montana wind sweeping across the interstate shoulder. The man in the tailored navy suit didn't even bother lowering his voice. He glanced at Ethan Brooks's oil-stained work shirt, then at the aging Ford F-150 parked behind him, as though that explained everything worth knowing. Ethan simply tightened the last connection beneath the hood of the stranded SUV and stepped back. The late afternoon sun glowed across the rolling fields beyond the highway, turning the dry grass gold. "Try it now," he said. The engine started instantly. A woman standing beside the vehicle let out a quiet breath she seemed to have been holding for miles. Claire Whitmore looked relieved, but before she could speak, the investor beside her scoffed. "Lucky guess." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe." From the passenger seat of the pickup, 8-year-old Lucy Brooks had heard every word. Her small fingers tightened around her sketchbook. The drive back to town felt longer than usual. The tires hummed across two-lane roads lined with fence posts and cottonwoods. Lucy stared out the window until she finally asked, "Dad, is a grease monkey a bad thing?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Just means I fix things." "Then why did he say it like that?" The question lingered between them. Ethan gave a faint smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Some people think what you do matters more than who you are." Lucy looked unconvinced. The silence that followed felt heavier than the toolbox rattling in the truck bed. That evening, the familiar smell of motor oil and fresh coffee drifted through Brooks Auto Repair. Ethan locked the front door and headed toward his office. On the corner of the desk sat a small metal tin. He opened it briefly, checking that something inside remained exactly where he had left it. A blackened car key rested against faded velvet. Lucy appeared in the doorway. "Is that the same key?" Ethan closed the tin a little too quickly. "Yep." "Why do you keep it?" For a moment, the fluorescent lights seemed louder than the room itself. "Long story, kiddo." Lucy waited. Ethan never told stories about that key. Never. Before she could ask again, his phone buzzed. A local news alert flashed across the screen. Whitmore Agricultural Systems, one of the largest employers in the region, was facing a major operational crisis. Deliveries had stalled across multiple states. Millions of dollars were reportedly at risk. Ethan's expression changed for only a second, but Lucy noticed. "Do you know those people?" she asked. "Not really." Yet he read the article twice. Later that night, after Lucy had fallen asleep on the couch with her sketchbook open beside her, Ethan sat alone at his desk. Rain tapped softly against the garage windows. The article remained on his screen. Most people would have seen a business problem. Ethan's gaze settled on a single detail buried halfway down the report. Something about it didn't make sense. Not even a little. He leaned back slowly, studying the numbers again. Then he looked toward the metal tin. Toward the burned key. Toward a part of his life he never touched unless he had to. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains. Inside, a decision barely larger than a whisper began to form. For the first time in years, Ethan Brooks considered getting involved in something bigger than his garage. The detail would not leave him alone. By sunrise, Ethan Brooks had read the same logistics report 4 times, and the numbers still pointed to the same impossible conclusion. A shipment could not disappear from 3 different distribution hubs unless someone was looking in the wrong place. The coffee in his chipped mug had gone cold. Outside, pale morning light spread across Main Street while the town slowly woke around Brooks Auto Repair. Ethan folded the newspaper and slid it aside. He had no reason to care about Whitmore Agricultural Systems. Yet something about the problem felt familiar, like hearing a strange noise in an engine and knowing it would bother you until you found the source. Lucy sat at the counter eating pancakes before school. She colored quietly for a few minutes before holding up a drawing. It showed Ethan standing beside his truck. Above him she had written one word in bright blue marker. Hero. Ethan smiled. "That is a pretty good truck." Lucy frowned. "I was drawing you." The smile faded into something softer. A few minutes later she climbed into the passenger seat. As Ethan pulled toward the elementary school, she looked out the window and asked, "Do heroes know they are heroes?" Ethan glanced at her. "I do not think so." She seemed satisfied with that answer. By mid-morning, the garage doors stood open to crisp mountain air carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Ethan worked beneath an aging Chevrolet Silverado when a black SUV rolled into the lot. He recognized it immediately. Claire Whitmore stepped out. Not in a business suit this time. Jeans. Boots. A gray jacket. She looked tired. "Do you always show up unannounced?" Ethan asked. "Only when I run out of better ideas." That earned the smallest laugh. Claire handed him a folder. Inside were transportation maps, inventory reports, and distribution schedules. "You read the article, did you not?" Ethan closed the folder. "What makes you think I can help?" "Because when my SUV broke down yesterday, you diagnosed it in 30 seconds. Cars are simpler than corporations. Not according to my board." The wind rattled a loose sign above the garage entrance. For a moment neither spoke. Then Claire said something unexpected. "I asked around town." Ethan's expression changed. "That was a mistake. Maybe. But nobody could explain you." The words lingered. Nobody could explain why a man with his reputation stayed in a garage that barely broke even. Nobody could explain why he turned down investors who had approached him before. Nobody could explain why he seemed determined to remain exactly where he was. Claire noticed the wall go up behind his eyes. Still, she left the folder. "Take a look." "I did not say yes." "I know." She drove away. The folder remained on his workbench all afternoon. Near closing time, Ethan finally opened it. 5 pages in, he found another inconsistency. Then another. His jaw tightened. Someone inside the company was making decisions based on information that had been wrong for months. The mistake was obvious once he saw it. The strange part was that nobody else seemed to. Rain clouds gathered over the mountains by evening. Lucy sat on the office floor doing homework while Ethan studied the reports. "Dad? Are you helping the lady?" "I have not decided." Lucy erased part of a spelling word. She looked lonely. Ethan looked up. Children notice things adults missed. "Why do you think that?" "Because she smiled with her mouth but not her eyes." The room grew quiet. A distant roll of thunder drifted across the valley. Lucy returned to her homework. Ethan stared at the reports again, but his thoughts were no longer on distribution routes. For the first time, he wondered why a successful CEO had come to a small-town mechanic instead of trusting the people already around her. And somewhere beneath that question waited another one. What had happened to make Claire Whitmore stop trusting her own world? Why would a woman who ran a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars drive 2 hours to seek advice from a mechanic? The question stayed with Ethan through the weekend. By Monday morning, another one had joined it. If the mistake in Claire Whitmore's company was so obvious, why had nobody inside the company seen it? The sky hung low over the valley as Ethan unlocked the garage. The air smelled of wet asphalt after a night of rain. He expected another ordinary day. Instead, he found Claire waiting beside the front door with 2 paper cups of coffee balanced on the hood of her SUV. "You came back. You found something." Ethan looked at her for a moment. "You sound pretty sure." "You are the only person who has not tried to impress me." That answer caught him off guard. They sat at a worn wooden table in the office while morning traffic drifted along Main Street outside. Ethan spread several pages across the desk. He pointed to inventory reports, delivery schedules, and warehouse transfers. The problem was not stolen inventory. It was a software assumption buried deep inside the tracking system. For months, products had been routed according to outdated demand forecasts. Every decision afterward had been built on bad information. Claire stared at the pages. Then she stared at Ethan. "My executive team spent 6 months on this." Ethan shrugged. "They were looking for a complicated answer." A slow smile appeared. This time it reached her eyes. For the first time since they met, she looked less like a CEO and more like someone relieved to stop carrying a weight alone. An hour later her phone rang. The smile vanished. Ethan watched her listen without speaking. By the time the call ended, tension had returned to her face. What happened? My board wants an emergency meeting tomorrow. Because of this? Claire nodded. They do not believe a mechanic found something their consultants missed. The words hung between them. Neither said it out loud, but they both knew what that really meant. A mechanic. Nothing more. That afternoon, after school, Lucy sat at a booth inside Miller's diner with a grilled cheese sandwich and a glass of lemonade. Ethan was helping the owner fix a refrigeration issue in the kitchen when the bell above the entrance chimed. Claire walked in. Lucy recognized her immediately. The lonely lady. Claire laughed softly. The what? Lucy's cheeks turned pink. I mean, the lady from the highway. Instead of seeming offended, Claire slid into the booth across from her. For 20 minutes they talked about school, drawing, and favorite ice cream flavors. Nothing important. Yet when Ethan returned, he found Lucy showing Claire pages from her sketchbook. That almost never happened. Lucy guarded her drawings like treasure. As Claire stood to leave, a folded piece of paper slipped from the sketchbook onto the floor. She bent down and picked it up. The drawing showed Ethan beside a little boy standing next to a pickup truck. Claire's expression changed. There was no boy in any photo Ethan kept around the garage. Lucy reached for the paper too late. The room grew quiet. Who is he? Claire asked gently. Ethan stepped forward and took the drawing before Lucy could answer. His voice remained calm. Someone we miss. Nothing more. Outside, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds and cast long shadows across the parking lot. Claire looked at Ethan differently now. Not because of the company. Not because of the reports. Because for the first time, she had seen evidence of a chapter in his life that nobody seemed willing to talk about. And Ethan had just revealed how far he was willing to go to keep it buried. Who was the boy in Lucy's drawing? Claire Whitmore carried that question with her all the way back to Billings. The mountains stood dark against the evening sky while headlights streamed across the interstate. She had spent years learning how to read people. Investors. Executives. Competitors. Yet Ethan Brooks remained difficult to understand. He could explain a failing logistics network in minutes, but one simple question about a child had closed every door behind his eyes. By the time she reached company headquarters, another problem was already waiting. The board meeting began the next morning beneath bright conference room lights and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking miles of farmland. Claire presented Ethan's findings. The reaction was immediate. Silence. Then skepticism. One executive folded his arms. A mechanic found what our consultants missed. Another shook his head. We are really betting the company on that? The discussion grew sharper with every passing minute. Nobody attacked the analysis itself. They attacked where it came from. Claire listened. Watched. Measured. Then something clicked. The resistance was too strong. Too coordinated. People were not questioning the data. They were protecting something. That realization changed everything. When the meeting finally ended, Claire returned to her office and studied the reports again. This time she stopped focusing on the logistics problem and started looking at the people attached to it. 3 names appeared repeatedly. 3 executives who had approved the same flawed forecasts month after month. A chill settled over the room. This was no longer just a mistake. Meanwhile, 200 miles away, Ethan tried to focus on work. The garage remained busy all afternoon. Oil changes. Tire rotations. Brake inspections. Normal things. Yet his attention kept drifting back to the folder Claire had left behind. Near sunset, an unfamiliar pickup rolled into the lot. A man in an expensive jacket stepped out. Not a customer. Not from town. I am looking for Ethan Brooks. You found him. The man handed over a business card. Vice President of Operations. Whitmore Agricultural Systems. I would like to hire you as a consultant. Ethan almost laughed. You drove all this way for that? We have a problem. So I hear. The executive lowered his voice. You were right. For a brief moment, either man spoke. Wind pushed across the empty highway beyond the garage. A train horn echoed somewhere far across the valley. Then Ethan surprised him. No. The executive blinked. No? I am not interested. The answer came too quickly. Too firmly. As though the decision had been made years ago. The man left confused. Ethan remained standing outside long after the truck disappeared. Lucy found him there 10 minutes later. Dad? He turned. You okay? Sure. She studied him with the blunt honesty only children possess. That sounded like one of your fake sures. The corner of Ethan's mouth lifted. Lucy walked beside him into the office. As she climbed into a chair, her eyes landed on the metal tin sitting near the desk. Dad? Yeah? Does that key have something to do with the boy? The question stopped him cold. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the parking lot. Inside, the old wall around his heart felt thinner than before. For several seconds he looked at the tin without touching it. Then he quietly said, Yes. Nothing more. Yet it was the first honest answer he had given about either one. And hundreds of miles away, Claire was reaching a difficult conclusion of her own. The biggest threat to her company might not be the broken system. It might be someone inside the company who needed that system to stay broken. Why had Ethan refused so quickly? Claire could not shake that question. Most people would have accepted the consulting offer before the conversation was finished. The company was offering more money than many people in town earned in months. Yet Ethan had turned it down without hesitation, almost as if success itself was something he no longer trusted. That answer bothered Claire nearly as much as the growing evidence on her desk. 3 days later she stood in a warehouse outside Bozeman. Forklifts moved between towering shelves while supervisors checked inventory scanners. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Claire walked the floor with reports in hand. Every number matched the records. Every shipment appeared accounted for. Then she noticed something strange. Products marked as high demand were being stored in the least accessible sections of the building. Meanwhile, slower inventory occupied prime locations near loading docks. The arrangement made no operational sense. Yet dozens of employees had worked around it for months without questioning it. Someone had trained the system to create inefficiency. And someone else had benefited from the chaos. Back in town, Ethan tried to focus on work. A customer's Ford Ranger needed a transmission rebuild. Another truck needed brake lines replaced before winter. Simple jobs. Honest jobs. The kind he understood. But every evening another message arrived from Claire. Not demanding. Not pushy. Questions. Photos. Data. Each one ending with the same request. What do you think? By Friday he found himself answering. Only one sentence at first. Then two. Then paragraphs. The garage office lamp glowed late into the night, while Lucy finished homework at the desk across from him. You are helping her. Ethan looked up. Just answering questions. Lucy smiled. That sounds like helping. Children had a way of reducing complicated things to their simplest truth. The following afternoon a package arrived at the garage. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. No letter. No explanation. Only a handwritten note tucked between the pages. Thought you might want a place for your ideas. Claire Ethan stared at it for a long time. Nobody had given him something that thoughtful in years. Not because it was expensive. Because she had noticed something. She had seen the stacks of notes scattered around his office. The sketches. The calculations. The observations. Someone had been paying attention. That realization unsettled him more than he expected. Later that evening Lucy sat on the porch steps while fireflies drifted across the yard. The notebook rested beside Ethan. Dad? Yeah? Do you like her? Ethan nearly dropped his coffee. Lucy giggled. I mean as a friend. The question hung in the warm summer air. Finally he nodded. I think she is a good person. Lucy seemed pleased. Then her smile faded. Do you think people leave because they stop loving you? Ethan turned toward her. The question had come from nowhere. Or maybe not. Children often carried worries for weeks before speaking them aloud. Why would you ask that? She stared into the darkness. Just wondering. Ethan set down his mug. People leave for a lot of reasons, kiddo. Lucy nodded but said nothing else. For a moment both sat quietly watching the fireflies. Then Ethan noticed something sticking out from the back of the notebook. A folded document. He opened it. His expression changed instantly. It was an old university acceptance letter. Addressed to him. Dated 20 years earlier. One he had not seen in years. Claire could not possibly have had it. Which meant only one thing. Someone had slipped it into the notebook before it reached him. And for the first time, Ethan realized there might be people asking questions about his past besides Claire. Questions he had spent years making sure nobody could answer. Who had placed the acceptance letter inside Claire's notebook, and how had they gotten a copy of something Ethan had hidden for 2 decades? The question followed him through the entire weekend. The envelope sat beside the burned key inside the metal tin, 2 pieces of a life he had spent years keeping separate from the present. By Monday, another surprise arrived. Claire was standing outside the garage before opening time, hands buried in the pockets of her jacket as a cool breeze rolled down from the mountains. The moment she saw Ethan's expression, she stopped smiling. Something happened. It was not a question. Ethan held up the letter. Claire read it once, then again. I have never seen this before. He studied her face. No hesitation. No defensiveness. Just confusion. You did not put it there? No. For the first time, both of them were looking at the same mystery. Later that afternoon, Claire invited Ethan to visit company headquarters. He almost refused. Almost. Yet 2 hours later he found himself walking through glass doors beneath a polished steel logo that could have fit inside his garage 20 times over. Employees moved quickly through bright hallways. Some glanced at him. Some did not bother hiding their judgment. Claire noticed. So did Ethan. Neither commented. During a strategy meeting, Ethan listened quietly while executives debated solutions that ignored the actual problem. Then one manager dismissed his observations with a tight smile. With respect, this is a little outside automotive repair. The room grew still. Ethan could have argued. Instead he gathered his notes and stood. You are right. Several people looked relieved. Then he pointed to 3 separate forecasting errors on a projection screen. One by one. No raised voice. No grand speech. By the time he finished, nobody was smiling. The manager stared at the numbers. Claire watched something shift across the room. Not respect yet. But doubt. The dangerous kind. That evening, the drive home felt quieter than usual. Lucy was waiting on the porch swing when Ethan pulled into the driveway. She ran over carrying her backpack. Guess what? He smiled. What? I got picked for the school art showcase. Her excitement lasted only a second before fading. But Madison said my family is weird. Ethan knelt beside her. Why? Lucy looked down. She said normal families have moms. The words landed harder than she intended. Ethan felt it immediately. So did Lucy. Dad, I am sorry. He pulled her into a hug. You do not have anything to apologize for. For a moment neither moved. The evening sun painted the yard gold while crickets sang from the tall grass. Then Lucy whispered, I think Claire would have told her to stop. Ethan almost laughed. You might be right. After Lucy went inside, his phone buzzed. A message from Claire appeared on the screen. Attached was a photograph. It showed a company archive box uncovered during an internal records review. Across the side was a handwritten label. Brooks Project Files. Ethan stared at the image. He had never worked for the company. Yet somehow his name was already sitting inside the archives years before he ever met Claire Whitmore. Why would a company archive contain files connected to Ethan Brooks years before he ever stepped inside the building? Claire spent most of the night asking herself that question. By dawn, she had the archive box sitting in her office. Dust coated the corners. The cardboard had yellowed with age. Someone had not touched it in a very long time. Yet Ethan's name was written across the side in black marker, as clearly as if it had been added yesterday. She opened the box. Inside were engineering proposals, transportation models, and supply chain designs dating back more than 20 years. The author line on every document carried the same name: Ethan Brooks. Claire stared at the pages. The dates made no sense. These reports had been submitted before Ethan opened his garage. Before Lucy was born. Before most people in the company even worked there. One document stopped her cold. A letter offering Ethan a position in a special logistics development program. The salary alone would have changed his life. Across the top, someone had stamped a single word: declined. Hours later, Claire drove straight to the garage. She found Ethan replacing a water pump beneath the hood of an old Ford Explorer. He looked up when she entered. "You never mentioned any of this." She handed him the documents. For several seconds he said nothing. The color drained from his face. "I thought those were gone. Who were you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Not accusatory. Not judgmental. Just honest. Ethan leaned against the workbench. The garage seemed quieter than usual. The ticking of cooling metal echoed through the building. Finally he answered. "Someone with plans?" Nothing more. But this time Claire did not let the silence end the conversation. "Why did you walk away?" Ethan looked toward the office. Toward the metal tin resting on the shelf. Toward 20 years of memories he never touched. Then he said words he had avoided for far too long. "My son died." The room went still. Claire felt the answer before she understood it. Ethan swallowed. "He was 7. The same age Lucy had nearly reached when the story began. He loved trucks. Loved riding with me. One afternoon there was an accident." His voice remained steady, but every word seemed heavier than the last. "The key in the tin belonged to the vehicle." Claire finally understood. The burned key. The drawing. The locked doors inside him. Everything connected. "I blamed myself." Ethan looked down at his hands. "Everybody told me it was not my fault." A pause. "I never believed them." Outside, wind pushed across the valley. The American flag above the gas station across the road snapped against its pole. For years Ethan had carried the weight alone. Now someone else finally saw it. Not the mechanic. Not the analyst. Not the man who solved problems. The father. That evening Claire stayed for dinner. Nothing formal. Just burgers on the back porch while the sky turned orange over the distant hills. Lucy laughed at something neither adult could remember minutes later. For a little while the sadness lifted. For a little while Ethan looked present instead of haunted. Then another change arrived. Claire's phone buzzed. A message from a board member. She opened it. Her expression hardened. "What is it?" Ethan asked. She handed him the screen. An emergency vote had been scheduled. Someone inside the company was moving faster than expected. The board intended to remove Claire as CEO within 48 hours. Attached was a recommendation report supporting the decision. Ethan recognized the document immediately. Large sections had been copied from his own analysis. His work was being used. His name was not. And for the first time since this began, Ethan felt something stronger than grief. Someone was not just hiding mistakes anymore. Someone was willing to destroy another person's future to protect themselves. Who had stolen Ethan's work, and how long had they been preparing to push Claire out? 48 hours was not enough time to answer either question. The emergency board vote had already been scheduled. Investors were nervous. Regional managers were demanding answers. Every hour seemed to tighten the knot around Claire's future. The next morning she stood before a wall of windows overlooking thousands of acres of farmland. Autumn sunlight stretched across the fields in long bands of gold. Normally the view calmed her. Not today. A second message arrived from the board. The recommendation to remove her had gained support overnight. 3 executives were leading the effort. The same 3 names Ethan had noticed weeks earlier. For the first time, the pattern was impossible to ignore. They had not merely protected a broken system. They had built careers around it. Meanwhile, 200 miles away, Ethan sat alone in his office before opening the garage. The metal tin rested beside his coffee mug. The burned key lay in his palm. For years he had used grief as a reason to stay small. Fix the next truck. Pay the next bill. Raise Lucy. Keep life manageable. Safe. But safety had come with a cost. Every opportunity had been left unopened. Every dream folded away. His gaze drifted toward the old acceptance letter. Then toward Claire's notebook. Then toward the photograph Lucy had drawn months ago. The picture showed their family standing beneath a bright summer sky. The missing boy was still there. Lucy had never stopped including him. A knock interrupted the silence. Claire stood in the doorway. She looked exhausted. Not defeated. Just tired. The kind of tired that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. I need help, she said. No speeches. No pride. Just the truth. For a moment Ethan said nothing. Then he nodded. That simple decision changed everything. The following day they worked side by side in a conference room at headquarters. Reports covered the table. Financial forecasts filled whiteboards. Hours disappeared. The more they dug, the clearer the story became. The executives had ignored internal warnings for years. Inventory inefficiencies had hidden millions of dollars in losses. Correcting the system would expose every bad decision attached to it. That was why they wanted Claire gone. A replacement CEO could become the scapegoat. The room fell quiet. Claire stared at the evidence. Why did nobody stop this? Ethan looked at the reports. Because people stop asking hard questions when bad answers become profitable. The words lingered. Not because they were clever. Because they were true. Late that evening, they stepped outside for air. The parking lot was nearly empty. A cool wind moved across the prairie. For several moments neither spoke. Then Claire surprised him. I was engaged once. Ethan turned toward her. She rarely discussed personal things. He died 6 months before the wedding. The confession arrived without drama. Without self-pity. Just honesty. I spent years thinking if I worked hard enough, I would never have to feel that loss again. Ethan understood immediately. Different stories. Same wound. Both had built lives around avoiding pain. Neither had truly escaped it. Back home that night, Lucy waited awake despite the late hour. Dad? Yeah? She wrapped her arms around him. I am glad you went. He smiled. Why? Because you seem more like yourself. The answer stayed with him long after she went to bed. Hours later, another message arrived from Claire. The board vote had been moved up. 24 hours remained. Attached was a final agenda. At the very bottom sat a line neither of them expected to see. Special witness presentation. No witness name. No explanation. Only one certainty. Someone else knew far more about Ethan Brooks than either of them had imagined. 24 hours remained, and nobody knew who the witness would be. That uncertainty followed Claire into the boardroom the next morning. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows overlooking the fields beyond headquarters. Investors filled one side of the room. Executives filled the other. The atmosphere felt less like a business meeting and more like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Claire sat at the head of the table. Ethan remained near the back wall, uncomfortable in a room full of expensive suits. Yet for the first time, he was not there because someone had dragged him into the fight. He had chosen to show up. The meeting began exactly as expected. Criticism. Accusations. Statistics twisted into weapons. The three executives presented their case for removing Claire. They pointed to losses, delays, falling confidence. Then they unveiled the recommendation report built from ideas Ethan had originally uncovered. The room shifted. Questions started. Pressure mounted. And then the witness entered. An elderly man with silver hair walked slowly toward the front of the room carrying a thick folder. Ethan froze. He recognized him instantly. Professor William Mercer, the mentor who had supervised his university research more than 20 years earlier. A man he had not seen since walking away from everything. Mercer opened the folder. Inside were original project submissions, research evaluations, and development proposals written by Ethan in his early 20s. The room listened as Mercer calmly explained how those same concepts had quietly circulated through industry networks for decades. Several innovations now credited to corporate teams had originated from work Ethan completed long before opening his garage. One executive attempted to object. Mercer simply produced documentation. Dates. Signatures. Records. Facts. The objections faded. Then came the final revelation. The mysterious archive box. The old acceptance letter. The forgotten project files. Years earlier, Mercer had shared Ethan's work with industry partners because he believed the young man had extraordinary talent. The files had remained buried inside company archives after leadership changes and reorganizations. Nobody had been investigating Ethan. Nobody had been stalking his past. His work had simply never disappeared. For years it had quietly survived without him. The room fell silent. Not because Ethan had won. Because everyone finally saw him clearly. The board vote proceeded anyway. Only this time the outcome changed. Claire remained CEO. The executives responsible for concealing the system failures were removed. The company would survive. Yet as applause echoed around the room, Ethan felt surprisingly little. The victory belonged to Claire. His attention had already drifted elsewhere. That evening he returned home beneath a sky washed clean by rain. The porch light glowed softly against the gathering darkness. Lucy waited on the steps holding her sketchbook against her chest. "Did everything work out?" Ethan smiled. "Yeah." She threw her arms around him. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Ethan walked into the house and retrieved the metal tin from the office shelf. The old burned key rested exactly where it always had. He carried it outside. The night air smelled of wet earth and pine. Crickets sang from the grass beyond the yard. Somewhere in the distance a train moved across the valley. Lucy sat beside him on the porch swing. "Dad?" He placed the key gently in her hands. For years it had represented the worst day of his life. The mistake he believed he had made. The son he believed he had failed. The future he believed he no longer deserved. Lucy studied the scarred metal. "Are you sure?" Ethan looked toward the stars appearing above the mountains. Then he nodded. "I think I am." A quiet settled between them. Not empty. Peaceful. The kind that arrives after carrying something heavy for too long. Inside the house, a framed drawing hung near the hallway. Ethan, Lucy, and the little boy who would always be part of their family. Nothing about that had changed. What changed was Ethan. For the first time in many years, he stopped treating love like a debt he could never repay. And when he looked toward the driveway, where Claire's vehicle had just pulled in beneath the porch light, he no longer saw another reason to be afraid. He saw a future. One he was finally willing to step toward.